So here we are together. And before we get into talking about sadhana, I just want to give a little bit of a reminiscence of our experience together over the past several months. My intention with the framing of the yoga philosophy, the way it's set up, was to create a comprehensive, sequential experience that builds on itself, so that when we, that it's iterative. When we get to the next thing, then we're integrating everything that came before. And the things that, the aspects of that iterative evolutionary framework, it begins with the evolution of consciousness itself as a fundamental principle in the Rig Veda and of yoga. I've said before that yoga is a set of practices that supports our movement along a path towards a state of yoga, and that the word yoga historically is used in all three ways: as a set of practices, as a movement along the path, and as a state of being. So that framing implies an evolution of consciousness from one state of consciousness to another state of consciousness. And when we're talking about yoga, when we're talking about union, unity, oneness, the implication is there's a state of consciousness that is separate, not unified, divided, and then the state of consciousness that is one, unified, whole, undivided, and that the process is moving from one to another. So the process is an evolution. And we can look at the framing of the Rig Veda that says that all of creation and all of the universe and everything is in the process of evolution from the fragmented, ignorant, unconscious state to the unified, whole, conscious state, a state in which the consciousness itself is aware. Consciousness is aware of itself as it is in truth, not as it is divided, not as it is with this illusion or delusion imposed on it, but how it actually is. So this is the evolution of consciousness, and it is happening collectively, universally, and also individually, because each of us is individuals within this broader collective movement. And the next thing that we talked about was forces of light and darkness. So evolutionary forces that support the movement from the state of unconsciousness, ignorance, division, fragmentation, separateness, to wholeness, unity, consciousness, truth, awareness, oneness. There's forces that help the process, and there's forces that push against the process. And that's just the way creation was made. That's the way the universe was constructed, was with these forces. And the yoga tradition talks about those forces in the Veda as the Devas and the Asuras, and it talks about those forces in the Puranas as well, also the Devas and the Asuras. The Puranas are kind of a extension of the Vedic hymns, which are more obscure and more poetic. The Puranas really flesh them out and make them more into stories that you can understand on a human level. But mostly those stories are about the tension and the battle and the conflict and the churning between forces of light, evolutionary forces that move towards wholeness, and forces of darkness, forces of obscurity, for counter-evolutionary forces. So again, this is like the backdrop that is leading up towards our current session, our current conversation about sadhana. In between there, we talked about spiritual experience and how the Upanishads give us an opportunity to touch into spiritual experience as opposed to intellectual analysis, rationalization. How do we know whether something is real, something is true? How do we discern between light and darkness, evolutionary forces and counter-evolutionary forces? So the Upanishads give us that teaching in various different ways about how to have, recognize, honor, and discern in the realm of spiritual experience. And then we talked about the process of purification in the context of yoga. So again, when you think about moving from a state of ignorance to a state of knowledge, a state of division and separateness to a state of unification, state of illusion to a state of truth, falsehood to reality. The thing that causes the state of illusion and delusion in the tantric, in the Shiva tantric tradition is called mala, which translates as impurity. So something is blocking that consciousness's capacity to know itself. Something is there in the way. There's a cloud. There's the analogy of smudges on a window pane so you can't see through it, or smudges on a mirror so you can't see the image clearly, a cloud in the sky, blindness. These are all analogies that are used in the yoga literature to describe this mala, this impurity that covers over our capacity to see things as they actually are. And that's the implicit thing here, but it bears repeating and focusing on that. When we talk about from a state of ignorance to a state of truth, it's the state of truth is always what is. It's the fundamental reality, but there's an ignorance that is imposed on it. There's a mala, there's an impurity, there's a delusion that is imposed on the state of truth. And we live in this kind of hall of mirrors, in this clouded reality, this foggy reality, this reality where there's smudges on the window, where things are not as they seem. Things are confusing. It seems like, and it looks like, and it feels like you are different than me, and you are opposed to me, and we have different needs, and that my needs conflict with your needs. It seems like I am not part of the earth. It seems like I am a separate being that has my own needs that are separate from the earth's needs. So these confusions have created all kinds of problems for humanity. And some of those problems are really coming to a head right now, collectively, globally. But they're just an illusion and imposition on the reality, which is that you and I are not different. We're not separate. We may be unique. We are unique, but we're not separate. We're not made out of different stuff. We're not separate from the earth. We didn't just pop up here in this place. Every molecule of us was already here before our consciousness came in and inhabited this form. Every breath that we breathe was already here before we breathed it. Every piece of nourishment and water that we take in was already here. It's all part of the earth. And so everything that we are is absolutely seamlessly interwoven with the earth. And the consciousness, the awareness that we are, is all part of also one fabric, one seamless weave of consciousness that's completely united and one. So me being separate from you, we're made out of the same stuff. We share common ancestors. And our consciousness is actually one thing that has divided itself up into, small, little individuated beings that experience themselves as separate. So there's this tension between the reality and the experience. And this is the whole thing about yoga, the tension between reality and experience. And in purification, in the process of purification that's a part of yoga, we wipe away the impurity. We release the things that are not real. We let go of the aspects of awareness or identifications that are not part of truth, the actual underlying immediate truth. And we talked about purification in the Yoga Sutras and in the Tantras, but purification is a pretty common theme throughout yoga, whether it's Hatha Yoga, whether it's the Upanishads and the Vedas, Tantric traditions. Everybody's talking about, the words that they're using translate as purification. And the last thing we talked about was yajna, the sacrifice, and the tension between the individual being that experiences itself as separate and the higher, deeper being. I mean, it's a challenge because the referential words that we have to talk about the deeper being, like it's somewhere deeper, or higher, like it's somewhere higher, deeper, like it's lower, higher, like it's higher. They don't make sense in a spatial term. But the more fundamental being, the soul essence of each of us, knows what it is, and it knows what everything is, and it hasn't left that knowing of reality as this seamless whole. And then there's the experienced being that is under the sway of what we call Maya in the yoga tradition, this illusion that we are separate and that my needs are in competition with your needs, and that the earth is, my needs are different from the earth's needs. And that there has to be a prioritization of one or the other. And this kind of sense of conflict as opposed to harmony. This lower being, this smaller being, this more isolated, confused being, the archetype of the yajna is one in which that being surrenders itself, offers itself, gives itself to the higher being. The part gives itself to the whole. And that's how your body works. That's how the weather works. That's how trees grow. That's how everything works, is by the part offering itself in collaboration to the whole, in service to the whole. Otherwise, you have no holes, and if you have no holes, you have no parts. If your liver doesn't work and your body doesn't work, then you have no liver. It's like there's this cycle through which there is interdependence of the part and the whole. And the natural organic relationship of any part to the whole of which it's a part is service, reverence, love, honoring. So all these are part of the yajna. And yoga, the movement towards the state of unity, from the state of fragmentation and separation to the state of unity, is a movement that is evolutionary. It's a movement that plays through this field of the tension of light and darkness. It's a movement that involves purification, and it's a movement that is infused by this yajna, this spirit of sacrifice. Now, yoga in the yoga tradition is spoken of in three different ways. It's called a yuddha, which is a battle. And we have the battle of light and darkness, Yoga itself, it's like a battle between these two forces, the forces that want to bring us forward and the forces that want to hold us back. And we can experience that on an individual level. There's aspects inside of us that want to hold us back from becoming who we are, from realizing who we are. And there's forces in us that are aspiring and reaching for that realization all the time. So it's a battle between those things. It's a yatra, which means it's a pilgrimage, it's a movement, it's a journey, along a path. And it's a yajna, it's a sacrifice. And the yoga process is described in these three ways: yuddha, yatra, yajna. And all of them have this evolutionary framework to them. Now that we have all that, now that we've unpacked all that over 6 months or however long it's been, we can talk about sadhana. Because sadhana is the practices, it's the practicalities, it's the what do we do in this process of yoga. In the Rig Veda, the word sadhana is defined as something that leads straight to a goal. You know, it's like a process of going straight from here to there. And, you know, the kind of collective evolution of consciousness on earth is a bit meandering. It goes here and there and here and there and here and there. It's eventually moving in one direction, but it's slow and it takes a meandering course. The course of yoga is straight. The course of sadhana is straight. It cuts through. It's said, I think Vivekananda or someone said, yoga is like accomplishing in one, or the process of yoga accomplishes in one lifetime what would normally be accomplished in many lifetimes. Or you could say it accomplishes in 1 year what would be accomplished in a whole lifetime spiritually. So it's a process. Sadhana is a process of moving straight to a goal. And this goes all the way back to the Rig Veda. It also has the sense of guiding well or furthering. So kind of keeping you focused, keeping one focused on the destination, guiding well, keeping the process going. So furthering as far as keeping the process going, and guiding well as far as keeping the process going in the right direction towards the intended goal. In the Mahabharata and other Kavya literature, like the Puranas, it's used, it kind of the sense expands a bit. Effective, efficient, productive of accomplishment, completion, fulfillment, perfection. So, you know, there's this sense of doing something that is fulfilling a purpose, that is effective and efficient. It also has the sense of conjuring or summoning, and of worship and adoration. But these come later and they're kind of more in the context of yoga. And there's, if you think about sadhana, if you think about the what, the practicalities of this journey of yoga, there's two main ways of classifying sadhana. And of course, there's subtleties and nuances, but if we're just going to be overly simplistic and break things down into two main ways of looking at it for the sake of just understanding, one is tapas. And tapas has to do with effort. The word means heat or hot. It also means, you know, going back to the Rig Veda, it also means pain and suffering, austerity, penance, mortification. These are kind of the senses in which tapas is used. And then the other one is surrender. In the tantric tradition, in the Shiva tantric tradition, there is upaya, like a moksha that comes from upaya, like means. So you do practices, you do stuff, and the practices and the things that you're doing lead you towards moksha, towards liberation, towards awakening. There's also anupaya, liberation, which means without any means. You know, one example is like a student goes to a teacher and the teacher says one sentence and the student immediately wakes up and realizes who they are. So that's anupaya, that's without means. That is surrender. That student in that moment is able to absolutely surrender. In the Krishna Bhakti tradition, there are nitya siddhas, and there are sadhana siddhas. And the nitya siddhas are people who woke up, who realized themselves, who never had to wake up. They never left, and this is in the Krishna Bhakti tradition, the Vaishnava tradition, that's considered, these are people who are part of Krishna's body. They never left Krishna. They never had the experience of separation. So they were embodied. They were born into this world without the experience of separation. And they came here to do something, teach something, share something very particular. And but they are nitya siddha. They are always in a state of perfection. And then there are sadhana siddhas, which is most everybody else, who achieves, well, most of the other people who have achieved a state of siddha, a state of perfection, a state of realization, get there through sadhana, through a practice, through effort, through kind of going through a process. So both of the, in various different traditions, both of these are acknowledged, that sometimes there's a process and sometimes there's really no process. Sometimes somebody does something intentionally for a long time, and then they wake up. Sometimes somebody just seems to wake up spontaneously, and it's not clear how that happened. Generally, it's understood that the person who wakes up spontaneously either is a special soul who has never really, isn't incarnating in the earth sphere for the purpose of self-growth. They've already done that, been there, done that. Or they did all that in other lifetimes. All the process stuff happened before, and they came up to this point and that they were ready, they were ripe. Like the ripe cucumber in the Rig Veda, like the ripe cucumber falls from the vine, is an analogy or a metaphor describing liberation. So these two ways, these two paths of sadhana, surrender and tapas, effort. Sri Aurobindo says that most people can't just spontaneously surrender. It's just not possible. It's not because there's something wrong with us. It's not because we are not trying hard enough or too afraid or we were born broken or whatever. It's just because that's the way it is. Whatever the purpose of our existence in this lifetime is, it's just not possible for us to spontaneously surrender. And so for those people, for those of us, effort is necessary. And effort falls under the category of tapas. There's a metaphor that I used in the text, if you read the text about sadhana, that Ramakrishna used, differentiating between the baby cat and the baby monkey. And the baby cat is, the baby monkey clings to its mother. It holds on. And as the mother swings around in the trees, the baby monkey is always clinging to the mother through its own effort. Its hands are holding on to its mother. And the baby cat just basically lies there. And the mama cat comes and picks it up by the back of the neck and moves it around and drops it. And the mother decides where the baby's going to go. So the differentiation is between the one who says to the divine, you do this, you show me, you pick me up, you take me, and the one who says, I'm hanging on here, I'm going to do this, I'm going to work my way through this. And generally, as I said, there's some nuance and subtlety. I mean, in a general way, it doesn't have to be one or the other for any individual person. It's not like any individual person needs to be just a baby cat or just a baby monkey. These are kind of archetypes that represent two poles of the sadhana spectrum. But these are kind of a good way of thinking about it, like the one who uses their own effort, or the kind of sadhana that uses one's own effort, and the sadhana that involves release and trust and prayer and invocation and absolute surrender. Today, we're going to talk more about the tapas, the sadhana of tapas. And as I said, tapas has this sense of heat and burning, and also of pain and suffering. I mean, if you get to the root of the word, whether we like it or not. And the word tapas is in the Yoga Sutras, and there's 60,000 translations of the Yoga Sutras. So if you want to go through them, you can see what all the different people's way of dealing with that. Tapas in the Sadhana Pada, the second book of the Yoga Sutras, the first verse of the Sadhana Pada, it defines what is Kriya Yoga. And it says Kriya Yoga is tapas, svadhyaya, and isvara pranidhan. So it's defining, like, Kriya Yoga is like active yoga, like the yoga of doing stuff. And the first thing that it throws out there is tapas. And so a lot of people have a lot invested in defining what that word means in a modern context that doesn't just mean bodily mortification. It doesn't just mean sitting out under the sun and lighting a fire in each of the 4 cardinal directions and then putting a 5th fire on top of your head. It doesn't just mean sticking a rail through your tongue and tying your tongue to a stone and standing there for 25 years. It doesn't just mean doing like this for the rest of your life. And these are all examples of things that people do as tapas. You will see yogis who never sit down, who they take a vrata, a vow, that they will never sit down or lie down, that they will never put their arm down, that they will never sleep, that they will never, these are intentional practices, sadhana, that are intended to sever the over-identification with the body and its signals. And there's a process of disembodiment that is sought and theoretically achieved through that, an identification with the inner being over the identification with the body's individuated needs. And whatever we think about that, there's a legitimate yoga tradition that has been, several streams of yoga lineage through thousands of years. People have been doing these practices and they're still doing them today, whether we like it or not, under the auspices of yoga and liberation. The thing about discomfort that's interesting is that there is a differentiation between what is pleasant and what is good. And in the Katha Upanishad, the Katha Upanishad is a special Upanishad. Katha means story, in which Nachiketa goes to death's door and he waits outside death's door until death lets him in, and then he asks to be taught. And he wants to know what happens to a soul, to a being after it dies. And death offers him all these different things instead of that. I'll give you, all the riches in the world and blah, blah, blah. And Nachiketas is one-pointed and clear. I don't want any of that stuff. I want to know the truth. I want to know the truth about what happens to a soul after it dies, which it's not just like, that's not like a fact. The implications of that are, if I know what happens to a soul after it dies, then I know myself. I know the nature of reality. I know the nature of suffering. So he's very one-pointed on wanting to know these fundamental truths about reality. And at a certain point, death says, wow, you are amazing. You have really demonstrated that you care more about what is good than what is pleasant. Because all the things that he offered him were about pleasure, power and pleasure. And there is this differentiation in our life between what is pleasurable and what is good. Should I, should I go for a walk, or should I stay sitting in front of the computer? I laugh because sitting in front of the computer isn't necessarily pleasurable physically, but there's something that I get addicted to when I'm doing a work project, and I feel like I just need to stay there in front of the computer until it's done. And really, if I just went for a walk, I would feel much better. If I eat a bunch of sugar, then, it might have been pleasurable while I was doing it, but for me specifically, I'm super sensitive to sugar. I get whacked out. I feel nauseous, I feel dizzy, I feel hot and cold and like dirty inside and all kinds of weird stuff. I need to fall asleep. So, there's like pleasure on an immediate level, and then there's kind of good, what is good. If I want to develop a yoga practice, there may be times when I'm in the middle of my asana practice and I don't feel like doing it anymore. There may be times when I'm in the middle of meditation and I feel like I just want to get up and walk away. What do I do? How do I differentiate or discern between what I should be doing at that moment? So this tension between the distractibility, the cravings, there's also the feeling of release that comes if I yell at somebody. That there's something pleasurable about, even yelling at someone or just kind of getting a nice dig in there, insulting someone. There's something pleasurable about that. There's something gratifying and satisfying about that. But is it good? And when we say good, in the context of yoga, good means, is it going to help me realize myself? Is it going to validate and help me move forward along the process of self-realization? All the context of good within yoga is about that. So that this tension, suffering doesn't have to be extreme, and it doesn't have to cause disembodiment, and it doesn't have to be, infused with self-hatred, and it doesn't have to be self-denying, but there's this kind of alchemical process that happens when we stay with something that a large part of us doesn't want to stay with. And sometimes healing comes through that. Sometimes we recognize that we don't need something that we thought we needed when we allow ourselves to be without it for a little while, even though there's this craving and desire and clinging, something in us driving to grab onto that thing. This is basically tapas. This is basically the principle of tapas. Expanding comfort through discomfort. So I may, one example I can think of is that if my legs are stronger, then I feel more comfortable going for a hike. If my legs are more flexible, I feel more comfortable sitting in Padmasana. But to get my legs to be stronger or to get my legs to be more flexible, I have to go through discomfort. I have to do something that isn't necessarily physically comfortable. But eventually, by doing it, I become more comfortable. So these are examples of sadhana. Asana is a sadhana that increases flexibility. And so one can sit longer in a meditative posture more comfortably as a result of going through the discomfort of the sadhana of meditation. Of sadhana of asana. This meditation, the more you practice meditation, the more comfortable you can be sitting quietly without any external inputs. So the sadhana of meditation, even though it may be uncomfortable to sit quietly and focus, whatever you're focusing on, your breath, a mantra, stillness, whatever, the act of bringing yourself back makes it so that over time you become more comfortable. So it's uncomfortable to keep bringing distracted, come back, distracted, come back, distracted, come back. It's uncomfortable. But over time, you become more comfortable. It may be uncomfortable just to sit and be quiet. We're so used to being drawn outwards that it can be lonely or scary or, just discomfiting, disorienting to be inside with our eyes closed in the silence. So, but doing it over time leads to a greater sense of comfort. So tapas isn't necessarily like all about self-mortification and pain and suffering just for the sake of cutting the ties with the body. It's also about entering into experiences that are reasonably uncomfortable with the purpose of expanding a sense of comfort in life. Tapas, that kind of tapas that is about self-mortification, can also get get to be about control and get to be about enhancing the ego and enhancing the sense of separativeness and enhancing my sense of I'm better than, or I'm more powerful than my body, and I'm overcoming these things, which is all the opposite of evolution towards an experience of what really is. And this is also kind of where the sadhana of tapas and the sadhana of surrender come together, is in this space of, doing something that enhances the capacity to surrender, doing a practice that enhances the sense of comfort in life that makes it easier for us to surrender. So they kind of touch each other in this space. In the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali says that to move from vritti sarupyam, identification with the vrittis, with the whirls of thought, with the thought waves, to sabija samadhi, so unified awareness with no seeds. Sabija samadhi is with seeds. So unified awareness with a seed, with a seed thought. He says, or Patanjali says, seek true knowledge of any object by traveling inward from a thought about it to a contemplation or sustained thinking about it. And the sustained contemplation will give way to the joy of identification. And this is pretty fundamental to the Yoga Sutras. You start with a thought about something, which is kind of a fleeting thing. You can think about the love that you feel for a loved one. You think about it. It's there, it's gone. It's a thought. Then you can contemplate it, which means you hold it. You stay with it. You feel it moving in you. You notice the sensations in your body. You notice what it does to your mind. You notice how your heart feels. You notice your sense of hope and aspiration that it opens up. Relaxation, trust, contemplating. And that eventually that contemplation will give way to the joy of identification, so that you are love for that loved one. Love isn't something that you're doing. Love isn't something that you're feeling or thinking about. You are the love itself. There's no two different things going on. So that's a way that Patanjali gives for moving from this kind of identification with I am my thought waves to a release of all the thought waves and an experience of oneness. This is a sadhana, right? This is a practice. It's a very specific, you start with the thought, you go inward to contemplation, and you stay with the contemplation until it gives way to oneness, the experience of oneness. It's similar to dharana, dhyana, samadhi. You stay with the dharana as you concentrate, you put your effort in that direction. Dhyana, it becomes seamless, and samadhi, it breaks through into oneness. So these are sadhanas that move us along the path to realization, and they are sadhanas of tapas in the sense that they involve our effort. And I'm using that word tapas a little bit like in the sense that effort implies staying with something beyond the point where we don't want to do it anymore. Beyond the point where we're like, okay, I'm done with that. I'm ready to go watch TV now. We stay with it. That's the tapas. And the tapas is what keeps us going. As I said, the word sadhana means staying on the same path to the destination. So staying on the path, moving forward, and being guided toward the appropriate destination. So these are the sadhanas of tapas that do that keep us on the path and keep us moving forward. Sadhanas of tapas can include things that are about helping the body to awaken. helping the body to awaken to its true nature, or helping the relationship between the mind and the body. We have things obviously like asana that fall into that category. We have things like pranayama that fall into that category of really sadhanas that work on the physical and energy body aspects of ourselves. And some sadhanas can work on the mind, like mantra, repeating a mantra, japa. Japa, the word literally means muttering. So just kind of staying with one seed sound, one seed mantra over and over and over and over again. Dhyana, meditation on a specific thing. Meditation on a candle flame, meditation on something that we can see, meditation on a specific thought. All of these are working on the mind, helping the mind to be more focused, to be more still, so that we can perceive directly the underlying reality and not be kind of distracted by the mind going this way and that. And there's also sadhanas that can work on the emotions. Bhakti sadhanas like kirtan, singing to the divine, or smarana, remembering, telling stories, reading the Ramayana, reading stories about Krishna. These are all ways, they're sadhanas. Reading stories about Shiva. They're sadhanas that are devotional, that work on our emotions, that work on, they shift us away from the isolated, lonely, fearful, angry, frustrated, disappointed, resentful kind of emotions, and bring us towards the open, reverential, loving, hopeful, trusting emotions. We're basically like holding on to those emotions. We're gathering them and holding them close to us. And so that our emotional being becomes used to them, becomes comfortable with them, becomes, it feels natural in that space. Other sadhanas include things like yantra, looking at a sacred symbol and contemplating it and, being in relationship with it. Pradakshina, going around in Tiruvannamalai, one of the things that we do is we walk around the 8-mile loop around Arunachala. And my experience of that is that it's about relationship with the mountain. It's several hours that we're walking in the early morning, and it's tiring, it's exhausting. And it's a journey, it's a real, so the practice, the process of staying oriented towards devotion and reverence, staying focused on the mantra Om Namah Shivaya while walking and walking and walking and walking and walking. It cultivates it cultivates perseverance, and it also, in a way, it's like I'm becoming comfortable spending time in a space where I'm prioritizing devotion above wanting to sit down.
Also the distraction factor, is it really the same?
So speaking of the distraction factor, it's so funny that you said
But
that.
it's just such an important part of all.
I know, but I'm being distracted right now. Corinne mentioned the distraction factor in Tiruvannamalai when you're trying to meditate and there's cars and cows and goats and chickens and
the fact that you're
all kinds of things. And in the process, she also distracted me. So that was the irony. Okay, so Pradakshina o yatra, pilgrimage, going to a sacred place, is a sadhana. Visiting any holy place, whether it's in India or in this country, or a loved one's grave site, or a place that's special to you, something that evokes a sense of truth, a sense of reverence, a sense of holiness. Going from here to there, the act of pilgrimage is a sadhana in itself. I think, let me just see if there's anything else. Well, I'll say one other thing, which is that perseverance is a part of this, commitment, stick-to-itiveness, staying with it, whether it's asana or pranayama or meditation or prayer puja, prayer, those are also sadhanas. When we were in Tiruvannamalai, we chanted one night. Well, somebody else chanted the 1008 names of Shiva, and we all said Om Namah Shivaya after everyone. So we said Om Namah Shivaya 1008 times out loud together. And there is definitely times where it's like, okay, that's, how many was that? But perseverance, staying with it, faithfulness. It's not just about winning. It's not just about getting to the end, accomplishing something. There's something about faithfulness, about embodying, because faithfulness isn't something you can think I am faithful, or I would be faithful, or I will be faithful, but being faithful requires being in a body and being in a circumstance where you stay with something for the sake of love. And I don't know if you can relate to chanting Om Namah Shivaya 1008 times being for the sake of love. But when I was doing it, that's what it felt like for me, was that I was doing it for the sake of love. And that alchemical kind of experience inside myself of saying the name over and over and over again for the sake of love, it grew something inside me. It cultivated something inside me. And not just that love and devotion and reverence, but also a sense of my own faithfulness, an appreciation of my own faithfulness. The Girivalam is the same way. So perseverance, consistency, regularity, stability, these are all things that are benefits and also aspects of sadhana. Babaji, Corinne and my first yoga teacher, I think, first yogi who was our teacher, Baba Haridas, at Mount Madonna Center. Any question you asked him, maybe 50% of the time he would just say, just do your regular sadhana. Just, I don't know. I'm not going to answer you. Just do your sadhana every day. He would say that sadhana is like pearls on a necklace. And if you keep going every day, then the necklace stays together. If you skip a day, then you break the necklace and all the pearls fall apart and you have to start over. That was kind of his extreme way of saying. But there is a value to the consistency and the regularity of every day being in the practice. And it's not just the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours thing. Of accomplishment and getting better and developing an art and an ease. Those things are there too. They're valid and important, but there's also the sense of becoming one with the practice and shifting from the upaya, the tapas, the effort, into the surrender, so that the thing that you're doing is less about doing it. It's less about the effort that it requires to do it. And it becomes more about the surrender, the flow. It's just moving through you. It's like, you're singing the 1008 names of Shiva and the names are just singing themselves through you because it's such a natural, organic part. You sit down to meditate and it's effortless because you've, cultivated that sense of comfort in meditation over a series, a period of years. Tapas is also about our relationship to limitation. And, the whole nature of this world is limitation because the divine is limitless. Your soul is limitless. The cosmos, the power of creation, the essence of love is limitless. And yet in this particular configuration that we're living in right now, all this differentiation is created by limitation. I am me, and you are you, and I am here, and you are there, and I don't know everything, and I can't feel everything, and I can't be everywhere at once. Limitation is inherent to this reality. And we have a funny relationship with limitation because we seek naturally limitlessness because it's our true nature, and we are seeded We're built to seek our true nature. So we're built to seek limitlessness. But we're so, this state of delusion is so pervasive that we often will jump to the illusion of control as a way to experience our limitlessness, as opposed to finding the limitlessness in surrender. So we'll jump to trying to, like the illusion of power, let's say, the illusion of intelligence, the kind of artificial promise of artificial intelligence making us infinitely intelligent, for example, on a collective level. The artificial promise of big guns and airplanes and bombs making us infinitely powerful. We have this clinging to the illusion of limitlessness as opposed to seeking the actual experience of limitlessness. And tapas brings us right up into, okay, where's this tension between my limitless being and my limited being? How do I accept my limited being as it is and also experience the limitlessness that I am? How can I allow both to exist at the same time instead of fighting against the limitation and ignoring the limitlessness that already is? So tapas, part of the suffering is just dealing with limitation. And each of us in our own lives has ample opportunities to deal with limitation. The places where we wish something were different, we wish we were different, we wish we had more, we wish we had more capacity, we wish we had more resources, we wish, but it's just not true. And to fabricate it, or to pretend like we could, or to strive after it and grasp for it, is just chasing after illusion. Whereas the reality is that limitlessness is inside of us. And if we could access that, then we would be much more comfortable with the perceived limitation or the experience of limitation that's playing itself out in this very limited particular sphere of existence. Limitation is not playing itself out on all planes of my being. Limitation is playing itself out here and now with my body and my mind and, my embodiment, my energy body. There are limitations that I experience, but the limitlessness of my being is there and accessible for me. And the tapas it brings us right up against that edge of limitation. How do I be with it and accept it? How do I find the edge of it without forcing something, without breaking something, without harming something, without denying something?